In my lifetime, more wars have been started by Liberal Democrats than by Republicans. Ignoring this truth is a guarantee that the propaganda system and the war-making system will continue. We've had a branch of the Democratic Party running Britain for the last 10 years. Blair, apparently a Liberal, has taken Britain to war more times than any Prime Minister in the modern era. Yes, his current pal is George Bush, but his first love was Bill Clinton, the most violent president of the 20th century, the late 20th century. Blair's successor, Gordon Brown, is also a devotee of Clinton and Bush. The other day, Brown said, "The days of Britain having to apologise for the British Empire are over. We should celebrate." Like Blair, like Clinton, like Bush, Brown believes in the liberal truth that the battle for history has been won, that the millions who died in deliberately imposed famines in British Imperial India will be forgotten, like the millions who have died in the American Empire will be forgotten. And like Blair, his successor is confident that professional journalism is on his side. For most journalists, whether they realise it or not, are groomed to be tribunes of an ideology that regards itself as non-ideological, that presents itself as the natural centre, the very fulcrum of civilised modern life. This may well be the most powerful and most dangerous ideology we have ever known, because it's open-ended. This is liberalism. I'm not denying the virtues of liberalism. Far from it. We're all beneficiaries of them. But if we deny its dangers, its open-ended project, and the all-consuming power of its propaganda, then we deny our right to the true democracy, because liberalism and true democracy are not the same. Liberalism began as a cult of the elite in the 19th century, and true democracy is never handed down by elites. It is always fought for and struggled for. A senior member of the anti-war coalition, United for Peace and Justice, said recently, and I quote her, "The Democrats are using the politics of reality," unquote. Her liberal historical reference point was Vietnam. She said that President Johnson began withdrawing troops from Vietnam after a Democratic Congress began to vote against the war. That's not what happened. The troops were withdrawn from Vietnam over 4 long years, and during that time the United States killed more people in Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos with bombs than were killed in all the preceding years. And that's what's happening in Iraq. The bombing has doubled since last year, and this is not being reported. And who began this bombing? Bill Clinton began it. During the 1990s, Clinton rained bombs on Iraq in what was euphemistically called the no-fly zones. At the same time, he imposed a medieval siege called economic sanctions, killing, as I've mentioned, perhaps 1 million people, including the documented figure of 500,000 children. Almost none of this carnage was reported in the so-called mainstream media. Last year, a study by the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health found that since the invasion of Iraq, 655,000 Iraqis had died as a direct result of the invasion. Official documents show that the Blair government knew this figure to be credible. In February, Les Roberts, the author of the report, said the figure was equal to the figure of deaths in the Fordham University study of the Rwandan genocide. The media response to Robert's shocking revelation was silence. What may well be the greatest episode of organised killing for a generation, in Harold Pinter's words, did not happen. It didn't matter. Many people who regard themselves on the left supported Bush's attack on Afghanistan. That the CIA had supported Osama bin Laden was ignored, that the Clinton administration had secretly backed the Taliban, even giving them high-level briefings at the CIA, is virtually unknown in the United States. The Taliban were secret partners with the oil giant Unocal in building an oil pipeline across Afghanistan. And when a Clinton official was reminded that the Taliban persecuted women, he said, "We can live with that." There is compelling evidence that Bush decided to attack Afghanistan not as a result of 9/11, but 2 months earlier in July 2001. This is virtually unknown in the United States, publicly, like the scale of civilian casualties in Afghanistan. To my knowledge, only one mainstream reporter, Jonathan Steele of The Guardian in London, has investigated civilian casualties in Afghanistan. His estimate is 20,000 dead civilians, and that was 3 years ago. The enduring tragedy of Palestine is due in great part to the silence and compliance of the so-called liberal left. Hamas is described repeatedly as sworn to the destruction of Israel. The New York Times, Associated Press, the Boston Globe, take your pick. They'll all use this line as a standard disclaimer, and it's false. That Hamas has called for a 10-year ceasefire is almost never reported. Even more important, that Hamas has undergone an historic ideological shift in the last few years, which amounts to a recognition of what it calls the reality of Israel, is virtually unknown. And that Israel is sworn to the destruction of Palestine is unspeakable. There is a pioneering study done by Glasgow University on the reporting of Palestine. They interviewed young people who watch TV news in Britain. More than 90% thought the illegal settlers were Palestinian. The more they watched, the less they knew, in Danny Schechter's famous phrase.